Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. For those of you who don't know me, I am Teresa Kamen. I am the Indiana Main Street Coordinating Program Manager here in the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. So if you guys haven't reached out yet, I encourage you to. Also, we have Glenn Ferris on the call today. He is on his third week in, so we are super excited to have him. But he is our new audience specialist here. So if you are an ODN level and want to reach out to him, I strongly encourage you to reach out to him. I know he plans on talking to everybody that is ODN level soon. Also today, who will be presenting is Jackie Swihart from Main Street America. Jackie, if you have not met her, is just a fabulous person. I love talking to Jackie, but she was also in my role a few years ago. Jackie worked in the Office of Community and Rural Affairs as the Indiana Main Street Coordinating Program Manager. She also worked for our Historic Renovation Grant Program Manager back when we had that. I know that was a very well receptive grant program, and we're always hoping for that to come back. As the coordinator, she successfully organized and led the implementation of rebuilding our Indiana Main Street and creating our different levels and pillars. So it was fantastic to have her, and she is a great resource and has been doing this in the network capacity building for coordinating program managers. So I am going to hand this over to her. I know she does encourage conversation, so please raise your hand, feel free to talk. And Jackie, I'll just go ahead and make you the presenter and you are set to go.
Okay, perfect. Can everybody hear me okay?
But I don't know what it is.
Yes.
Okay, I see some thumbs.
Oh, I can't hear you, Jackie.
Oh,
We can hear.
Yeah,
okay. Other people said they can.
No. Oh, no.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, hell, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Get around. Well, as long as we can hear.
Okay, it's just me. Never mind. Go ahead.
Well,
Oh, I got you.
okay. All right. I was like, no, we need you here because who knows what I'll say if you can't watch over me. And I'm just kidding. All right. Let me share my screen and we'll jump in. All right. Can you see my big screen? Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, well, thanks, Teresa. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm really glad to be here with you all today. Like Teresa said, I'm Jackie Swihart. I'm with Main Street America, and I'm very excited that we're going to be able to talk about fundraising and creative fundraising specifically. But as I was working through building out the slide deck, I realized, oh, I hope they don't think creative automatically means fun, because some of this is about strategy. So think about creative fundraising as, yeah, sometimes being a little fun, but I think what I want to really try to relay today is that creative fundraising is often strategic fundraising. So we'll talk about a few different things, but I do want to frame this conversation more broadly than just events or even just sponsorships or just asking people for money. What we're really going to be talking about is how a Main Street organization builds the resources that it needs to do the work, and how it tells the story of that work, and how to keep people connected to the mission over time. So we're going to start by highlighting a few trends in the fundraising world. We'll talk a little bit about some funding structure basics. That's where I'm like, that's not necessarily fun, but it is strategic and maybe creative in terms of how you think about your funding. But we'll also touch a little bit on some examples from other communities of different fundraising ideas. And then, yeah, like Teresa said, I'd love to hear from you all. I tend to just keep talking once I start, so feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind that at all. And Teresa, if like something comes through the chat and you want us to pause, just let me know. Okay. So before getting into specific fundraising ideas, I like to start with this very basic question. What are our most important resources? Because I think we usually think about money first, and yeah, money definitely matters. We know that any successful Main Street program needs financial resources to carry out the work that it's doing and to sustain operations over time. But as this group knows very well, money is not the only resource. And so we're constantly balancing our time and trust with different individuals and organizations and partners. We're building relationships, we're working on board leadership, volunteer energy, community credibility, like the list goes on and on and on. All those things matter, but I think the real challenge is that all of these resources and priorities are usually stretched across competing needs. And so just keep in mind that all of the things that you're doing within your workload and your mission are really why a strong funding structure matters. And so it's hard to say what the most important resource is, but I do believe that if you prioritize having a strong funding structure, you'll be better off, especially long term. So just thinking about that, we don't want to be dependent on only one source of revenue or one major partner. If we can diversify, then the whole program becomes less vulnerable. So quick reminder before we go into the details, most Main Street organizations operate as a 501c3. Is anyone on the call not a 501c3? You can just kind of raise your hand. Okay, I think everyone, I can't see everyone on one page, but who I do see, oh, I see one hand. Okay. Well, I think a lot of this will still translate, and if not, maybe you'll become a 501c3 eventually. But many Main Street organizations do operate as a 501c3, and that just means the IRS has recognized your organization as tax exempt and charitable, and that word charitable is important, and that charitable purpose can be really broad. But for our purposes in Main Street, it can often include community development or education, preservation, or anything that really benefits the public within our work. And so one of the main advantages of being a 501c3 is that many donors can deduct charitable contributions on their federal income taxes. And that can be a really important part of the fundraising conversation, especially when individuals or foundations and businesses are thinking about their charitable giving. So even if your organization is not housed in a 501c3, you can think about partners in the community that do have a 501c3 status, and maybe look for fiscal sponsors, because I think you could definitely benefit from having that flexibility to bring in funds, charitable funds. I will say, I'm not a lawyer. I think that's important to note. 501c3 status does come with rules, and so I just want to touch on this, but again, I'm not a lawyer, so hopefully you have a lawyer on your board. We always recommend that for that reason. But I do know that no part of the organization's activities or earnings can unfairly benefit a director, an officer, or any particular individual. And within being a 501c3, lobbying and legislative activity do have to stay pretty limited, but it doesn't mean you can't do it at all. And I like to point that out because I think sometimes we jump to conclusions about what we can and cannot do, including just the idea of being nonprofit. And nonprofit does not mean you cannot bring in more revenue than you spend. It means the organization exists for a nonprofit purpose, and that any profit or surplus you have is going to support your cause. And in fact, healthy nonprofits should really be building reserves and covering their true cost of operating the organization, and shouldn't just be planning based on the next grant or the next event or the next cycle. And so don't be afraid to pursue more funding than what would cover your annual work plan, because we want to make sure that the organization itself is in a healthy, sustainable place. And you are allowed to do that as a nonprofit. So with that, with those caveats in mind, with that foundation in mind, I want to start by talking through a few fundraising trends. And these are just trends. Doesn't mean you have to jump on every single one. It's just to have some awareness. And a lot of these you're probably already doing or you have awareness of, just to give you some ideas for how fundraising habits are looking and donor expectations and how communication and tools are changing within the fundraising world. Okay, so the first trend, no surprise, is AI and fundraising. And I know there are probably mixed feelings about AI, and that's totally fair. Some people see it as helpful, some worry that, especially with things like fundraising, it feels inauthentic. And, some of us, we just don't know enough about it yet to really trust it. Raise your hand if you're using AI regularly in your Main Street work. See at least a few. Okay. I'm curious if in the chat, if any of you want to share maybe like why you're not. Is it one of the things I said, you just don't trust it yet, or it doesn't feel authentic, or you just don't know enough? I'd love to just get your insights there. But while you're thinking through that, I do think AI can help with where capacity is thin. And so QGive is one platform. They work in the realm of fundraising, but they did a study and what best describes your workload. Most people feel overwhelmed. I don't think that's a shocker to anyone in this room, but I bring this up because if capacity is thin, that is maybe where AI and automation can help with things like drafting thank you emails or creating donor segments or suggesting giving amounts. It can be whatever you think it might need to be, but what I don't want to see ever is that there's no fundraising efforts because of a lack of capacity. And it's twofold, right? Like, I'm not saying AI should just replace an additional human on your staff, but it can help fill maybe small gaps where you have them, or if you're short capacity, if there's a big event going on. It's just something that is obviously a big trend right now, and I think we can be smart about how we use AI. And a lot of fundraising platforms have been using machine learning in the background for a very long time. So CRMs, they've used this kind of similar technology, but really the point I'm trying to make here is that if you're not ready to use AI in a big way, you can still use it in small ways to work smarter. It might help you get through a draft to start or turn a long story into a short email. I will tell you one thing, Main Streeters are great at so many things, but we're not very good at getting to our point sometimes. And so I have found that sometimes if I am trying to explain what Main Street does, how it works, I could write a novel and still feel like I'm not touching everything. And so sometimes it can be helpful in that way. I did want to point out Keela is another platform, and they do a lot of connecting how to use AI for fundraising, and they create different prompts that might be helpful. So, take it or leave it. I know we all have mixed feelings, but it is, regardless of how we feel about it, it is a trend, and I want to at least touch on it. The second trend is recurring donors and giving flexibility. So a recurring donor being someone who gives on an ongoing basis, and that could be monthly, it could be quarterly, or some other schedule. And, I think that matters for a few reasons. First, a lot of people are feeling the cost of living right now. Gas prices have been no joke. But they still might want to support an organization that they care about. They just can't give maybe that larger one-time gift, or it might feel financially more difficult for them to do right now. But recurring giving lets someone turn a larger annual gift into a smaller, more manageable piece. And people are also very used to subscription style spending. I mean, we all pay for Netflix, all the apps, utilities, other recurring expenses. So it's not a new concept, but I do think we can think about how a monthly Main Street gift can fit into that same pattern. And then the third thing when it comes to this particular trend, it gives you more opportunities for engagement. You can tell recurring donors what their money's helping to make possible. And you can do that throughout the year instead of maybe just only reaching out once during an annual campaign. QGive also has a radical recurring giving guide. So I would point you there and it's like 90s branded, which is really fun. I would point you there if you wanna learn more. Okay, third trend is peer-to-peer fundraising. How many of you have heard of peer-to-peer fundraising? Little show of hands. Okay, how many of you have heard of B2B, business to business marketing? Okay, a few more hands. That's what I thought. So peer-to-peer fundraising is kind of similar to B2B, business to business, but peer-to-peer fundraising, it's the same idea in that you're taking your fundraising approach and applying it to your supporters. And so instead of the organization being the only one making a financial ask, this allows your supporters to make the ask on your behalf. And so each participant becomes their own kind of mini influencer for your cause. They're going to be the ones telling their own network why the work that your organization is doing matters to them and invite their people to give. And I think that can be really helpful for donor acquisition because that first introduction comes through usually someone the donor already knows. And so, you know, this slide just lists a few reasons why you might consider peer-to-peer. But I was going to also add an example of my own. A few years ago, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Indiana Humanities, and they were celebrating their 50th anniversary as an organization, and they had a fundraising goal to raise $50,000 from 50 individuals, each raising $1,000. And so they reached out to 50 people who they felt like were big supporters of the organization. And I was one of them. They reached out to me and they said, would you be willing or interested in signing up to try to raise $1,000? And I said, yeah, like I don't typically fundraise. I'm one of those kind of, I get weird asking people for money, but I believe in Indiana Humanities so much that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna at least try. And being able to raise $1,000 feels a lot more attainable than 50,000. And so they gave me, and I'm happy to send it as a follow-up. I don't think they would mind. They gave me a whole handbook that outlined like how I could go about doing this. But essentially, I just posted a lot on my social media and I said, hey, I really care about Indiana Humanities. And I basically messaged it as, I know you guys care about me, and so will you support something I care about because you care about me? And they were able to get 50 people to raise $1,000 each and meet that $50,000 goal. The other thing about peer-to-peer fundraising that I like is that it can work during slower seasons. So if you are very event heavy with your fundraising or maybe a festival, that's usually like in your warm seasons. But here are some examples of how you can tap into what people are already doing or already interested in and making it a fundraising opportunity. So like a Super Bowl fantasy league challenge, you can connect to something people are already doing socially, and maybe people can pay $5, $10. I don't actually know how those things work because I don't do sports, but maybe like a March Madness bracket. I know people pay to do those. Again, I don't do sports. Some of you will know what I mean, others may not. But that's one example. I know there's also been an example of a rom-com movie challenge during February or March when people are inside, or a reading challenge. And so just thinking about things people are already doing and how you can make that into an opportunity where it feels more social and more fun, even if people are doing it independently. So peer-to-peer can also intersect with business-to-business fundraising. And this is an example of a letter from a small business to one of their larger suppliers. And the ask is, I think, really powerful because that relationship already exists. That small business is already working with that larger supplier. They have some kind of relationship. And so this is an example where instead of the Main Street organization making an ask directly, I think this is to Cisco. Maybe I can't read it because it's too small. But instead of the Main Street organization going to Cisco and saying, hey, will you make a donation to our organization? It's the small business owner who already has that relationship saying, hey, this organization supports the environment where my business operates, and I'm asking you to support it too. So that's another way you can use peer-to-peer. The fourth trend I wanted to touch on is focusing on unconventional donors. And so thinking beyond the same group of people who always get asked for money. That could be your local influencers. It could be, we all have our local celebrities, the people just kind of know. But it can also be younger donors or people with strong online networks. You don't need anyone like the mayor, for example. It doesn't have to be someone who's that locally famous, but in many communities, there is someone who has become sort of the face of downtown, or someone with a strong local following, or maybe just somebody that the community recognizes and trusts. And the key there is to just work with them to share and spread the word about your organization, and to encourage giving. And so that might be giving them draft posts or talking points or images, dates, a clear ask. This is really relevant to the younger generations like Gen Z. They are definitely worth paying attention to. They're described as very values driven. Younger donors want to see impact before they give. And so they are going to look at your website. They're going to look at your social media and your donation form. They're going to look at your public presence. And so connecting with younger donors is partly about the ask, but it is also making sure that your online presence is current, clear, and user-friendly. Purdue, a few years ago, I think I have this full graphic with all of the different generations that I can follow up with. But I really like thinking about the generational differences, and especially thinking about the younger generations, because they are unconventional donors. We haven't really tapped into that group yet. But understanding what motivates different generations and how they communicate will go a long way. Millennials are important because they are now a major part of the workforce, and I am a millennial. We are moving in further into our earning years. And so these groups are really the next target, if you will. And what some of the research shows about millennials is that they want authenticity. Ooh, that took me a second. They want transparency. They want visibility, visible impact, and they also want convenient ways to engage. And so, like, I'm a millennial. I'm probably not going to respond as well to a traditional membership letter that comes in the mail the same way one of your longtime civic donors might. But that doesn't mean one group is better than the other. It just means the messaging and the method need to match the audience. Merchandise sales is another way to connect with younger, unconventional donors. And merchandise sales can really serve more than one purpose. They can raise money, but they can also help build your PR and marketing and visibility and local pride. And so the products, they work best if they're specific to your community, but people do like to wear and use or gift something that shows pride in where they live or where they love to spend time. And then the last trend I wanted to highlight is about digital wallets and just generally easy payments. So this is one of the things where, donor expectations have changed quite a bit. People are very used to paying with Apple Pay, Google Pay, Venmo, whatever it might be. And if someone giving to your organization requires too many clicks or too much typing or a form that is clunky on an iPhone, a lot of people are just going to abandon the donation together and say, this isn't worth it. So thinking about things like digital wallets, they also signal familiarity and trust, like people are just kind of used to them now. Just thinking about how to make it as easy as possible for people to give. All right, so those are some trends. A few best practices when we think about the foundations we wanna create within our fundraising efforts, just to create a little bit of a baseline. So I think this group is probably well aware that a strong funding structure has a few core pieces. You need that diversified funding. You need an adequate budget for both operations and programming. We need to have a budget and our work plans aligned. And of course, we want to think about strategic fund development. But I see often in the field that fund development plans are not always thought of or prioritized. And so the distinction really between fundraising and fund development, fundraising asks the question, how can I raise money? And fund development asks, how can I build relationships to maximize funding for our mission? So there is a bit of a shift. With fund development, the goal is not just a transaction. The goal is the relationship that sustains your work. And so thinking about those things in slightly different ways can help you be more strategic. As far as balance of funding sources, we want to think in the rule of 1/3. So best practice, roughly 1/3 of your funding should come from public funding, 1/3 from private funding, and then 1/3 from earned income. And that split may not be realistic for every organization, but aiming for that principle is useful. And so we don't want all of our funding to come from events because things like weather or volunteer burnout and costs to put on events, those aren't predictable. And so having this balance gives you the room to adapt as needed. Fundraising plans, this is probably a template you've seen before. Just I will send this as a follow-up too, so you have different examples of revenue sources. But I think with fundraising, how many of you have heard of the buyer's journey? This is a bit more in the world of marketing. Yeah, you see there's usually a lot of marketing people on Main Street. But the concept itself, the idea is that people are buying what you're selling, even if as an organization you're selling a mission. They're buying into the mission, the story, and the belief that their support really matters. And so if you have folks who are in the awareness stage of the buyer's journey, people may not be ready to give yet. They're just beginning to understand the problem or the opportunity. But then in that middle stage, the consideration stage, they are starting to understand the problem a little bit more. They're learning and they're comparing their options. And then once you get to that decision stage, that's where people are ready to act. And so I share this because your communication should really match where people are. And if a person has never heard of your organization, they might be in that awareness phase and they need a clear story and some context. But a longtime supporter who is in the decision phase, they might need a specific ask and a reason to give right now. So think about where your donors might be. When you reach the ask phase, just remember that your story needs to answer a few basic questions. What differentiates your nonprofit from others who are working in a similar space? How effective are your programs that you're doing? Having data is really important. What impact stories can you share? How can people get involved? What are your plans for the future? These questions are just things that help keep your message grounded so that the ask doesn't get lost in the message. So we're going beyond, we do really good work to really helping people understand the work that you do, why it matters, and what's changing because of the work you've been able to accomplish. Okay, so I'm going to move into just a few quick examples, but I would also love to hear from you all if you've seen or have done yourself different new creative fun things in terms of fundraising. This might be one some of you have done. I know, especially with the flower pots, I've seen this often, but improvement projects are really good places for committee driven fundraising. And so let's say the design committee they're planning to do their flower baskets. Well, why not make that a fundraising effort? And so thinking about what projects the committees are working on that are very visible and easy for the community to understand. But the key there is to make sure you're building admin cost into the fees. So in this example, in West Virginia, they were selling bricks, and so just making sure that the brick, it obviously costs you a certain amount to order the brick, to install it, to track whose brick it is, to maintain it. So just making sure the price reflects more than those things, or else it's not really a fundraiser. They were doing $75 for their brick campaign. And so, projects like this, they can raise money, but they also create very visible investment, and it gives residents a very tangible way to leave their mark downtown, even if it is for one season, like a flower pot. Another example of just a very visible project that can become a fundraising initiative. So this is the Community Canvas Mural Program, and they used art to connect communities and support several events. And so just think about public art. I know it's something that we're often doing in Main Street. It can be a strong fundraising fit because, again, it's visible, it's emotional, and it's tied to place. And if people can see what their money helped create, and businesses also tend to like the foot traffic. These are easier, lower hanging fruit ways of being able to fundraise when they're projects that you might already be doing anyway. But also thinking about your annual giving or your packages. So making sure we do have different levels of giving and incentives. Here's one example of how those levels might be organized, but the important thing is to make sure that the options are clear, and people should really be able to understand what level they're choosing and what their support helps make possible, and what recognition or benefit is attached. And it's okay if this is why I showed this example, because if you give $10, you get a high five. Like, that's great. That's exciting. I want a high five. But it's kind of being a little silly, and it's also saying we do really appreciate this, and we're being transparent that, like, this is what we can give for that amount. And this moves into things like postcards or a sticker pack or a t-shirt or a pin. So you can think very out of the box about what these incentives are. And sometimes, like, some people will just want to give $10 to say, like, I donated $10 for a high five. And it just becomes kind of a funny thing to share. But hey, you got $10 and it works. Thinking about events, because I know we do events in Main Street. Sometimes I visit communities and they'll have a big event, but it's like outside of the district. And I know sometimes logistically that just has to happen, but whenever you can, try to make your events about an experience downtown. And then thinking about who in the community, again, these kind of like local celebrities. Sometimes people will pay to watch other people do things like disco. And so here's an example of a downtown disco. I think they had like their mayor and other, like kind of local famous people do a disco dance off. Yeah, so the disco dance off will feature some of your favorite townies who have agreed to boogie for donations. And so, don't be afraid to get silly. Sometimes people just we need more silly in our lives. I think nowadays everything feels very serious, and so having a little fun with it doesn't hurt. I think virtual fundraising is something that we obviously saw a lot of in COVID. but I kind of think we should keep some of our findings because it can just be another tool in your toolbox. This is an example from the pandemic where they had to turn most of their things into live auctions on Facebook. But they raised $17,000 in one night. And I know that was the pandemic and it's a bit different context, but I do think some of the lessons still apply. So thinking about online auctions or virtual tickets or raffles or live streaming some components of an event, that that can also reduce barriers for people who can't attend in person. And so it's also a more inclusive option sometimes. This was fun because the event ticket included a gift certificate to the downtown eatery of their choice, a delivery of ice cream to enjoy the night of this virtual event, beer from the local brewery, and they were able to enter to win a staycation. That was their door prize drawing for this virtual event. So just thinking about not everything has to be in person. I know introverts in the world would probably really appreciate something like this. Is Newcastle on the call? I didn't see, but this is an example from Newcastle that I love. And honestly, people love pets. And so using things that people love as the hook is really smart because people respond to things that feel personal and fun. And so maybe a pet related campaign would work because people love sharing photos of their animals and you can vote and you can engage people online. And so I love this as a reminder that fundraising doesn't always have to start with a formal nonprofit message. Like you can just do something fun and make it a fundraiser. So this is a good one. And if Newcastle's on the call, shout out because I use this example a lot. Some of you have maybe heard of Show of Hands, but it's a kind of a pitch style format. And the pitch style formats, as far as fundraising events, can work when you want other people to really rally or gather around small projects. And in this case, you let the community help choose what gets funded. And so you have different businesses, they're doing the whole Shark Tank pitch, but how it works is that all attendees to the pitch make a donation of at least $5 for a vote. And so if someone's like, I want 50 votes. Well, they'll pay $5 a vote and that's great. But someone can also come and just vote once and it's only $5. And so thinking about how you can turn this into a fundraising effort and also at the same time do something like support an entrepreneur who is working to grow or start their business. Another example here of a product-based fundraiser, the Milk District is in Orlando, Florida, and they have these really cool neon signs. So the Milk District is the name of their Main Street district. And so, products don't have to be complicated, but it should definitely feel authentic to the place. And so in this case, it is a neon sign of a milk jug. And so think about what is interesting or unique to your community. You don't want something that's going to feel generic because that'll be a lot harder to sell. So think about things that, people can only get from your downtown or your Main Street program, and it'll be more meaningful. You can also use branded products in partnership with local suppliers and businesses. So it's a win-win. You're kind of doing two things at once by fundraising for your organization and supporting small businesses. And then think beyond money. Sometimes in-kind contributions can be just as valuable as cash, if not more. So a lot of people might want to give, but they may not have the financial ability. And this is a good option for those folks. This is an example of where they posted this picture of a list of things that they needed on their Facebook page. And all of the items were donated within a week. And so don't be afraid to do that as well. But make sure you're capturing the cost of those in-kind contributions. So if, on that list, it looks like a coat tree, I would still document that as a $100 donation or the equivalent of, because we want to make sure that we're always demonstrating within our budget the true cost of operations, even if it was something that was donated and we didn't actually have to pay for. So, I guess the lesson with this is that people can't help if they don't know what you need. So be specific, make it easy for people to respond, and they more than likely will. And then the last thing here is just to say that, we all need a rainy day fund, and it's okay to fundraise for a rainy day fund specifically. If you don't have a rainy day fund or a reserve, definitely start planning for one. It might take time, but it definitely needs to be part of a long-term funding conversation. And you can build it slowly by setting aside a percentage of your event income or asking specific donors to support your reserves, especially like former board members who would really understand like why you need funding for reserves and that it's also difficult or more difficult to fundraise for something like that. It might be sending a letter campaign to alumni from the community. I've even heard of organizations accepting stock donations. So just think about your reserves as something that should happen now versus it's just something that can only happen after everything else is funded, because we have to make sure that we're funding stability too. And then I think the last few slides here are about support packages, which can be helpful because they're annual. And so instead of going back to the same people several times a year for different events and different projects, you can create tiers that combine all of your fundraising asks into one clear annual commitment. So that's going to save you time, your volunteers time. It will help shift attention back to your overall mission when people can see things comprehensively. And so since the pandemic, we have seen a lot of nonprofits move in this direction because during the pandemic, we saw that the need was, we were less dependent on individual events and we were trying to do things a bit differently. And so this is a lesson I think that has stuck around. But you might create different packages for individuals and families or businesses. Goal there just being to make the giving structure easy for both the donor and your organization. And, don't forget your corporate contributions. Your small businesses are often tapped out and may not be able to give any more than they already give. And so thinking about even outside of your district, what corporations can we pursue? And sometimes we have to think about what it is they care about. Sometimes it's going to be about them getting visibility or brand awareness or community reputation. I know that kind of circling back to AI, we're seeing a lot of data centers and they're not the favorite new people in the neighborhood all the time. And so they are the ones that have already built or are building, they're gonna have to and will be doing a lot of community engagement to try to improve their community reputation. I don't know about you all, but I get this like daily email from LinkedIn and it always says jobs, and there's always jobs from data centers that are like community manager directors or something like that. Point being that you are going to see some of these bigger new corporations, AI and otherwise, who are going to care about their community reputation. And so that's okay. We can build support packages that connect their support to recognition, marketing values, whatever it might be. But doesn't also mean you should just take money from everybody. That's something that as an organization, you have to decide like what you're comfortable with, what aligns with your values and what doesn't. And then just thinking about different examples of what you might include in a support package. It could be some people don't want to be acknowledged. And so maybe it is just a handwritten letter. Maybe it's tickets to some event. Maybe it's a goodie bag or a VIP gift. Here's just, I wanted to provide some different examples you might pull from. And then the last couple things here, regardless of how you fundraise, just make sure you focus on how you tell your story. And so always hitting on what you're doing now to help downtown business owners. What are your future plans for businesses in your organization? What are your communication methods? And so, communications plan is very important. How does your org add value to the community? How are we creating and maintaining community traditions and heritage, and making sure you're highlighting your accomplishments, but also what you want to do moving forward? And the very, very last point that I'll make before we hopefully open it up for some conversation. It might feel counterintuitive, but part of raising more money is learning when to say no. And, the number one complaint from development staff is that they do not have enough time. And that's true for many Main Street directors. We like to help people. We say yes because we care, but some yeses prevent us from doing the highest value work. And so one practical tool is to create a monetary no threshold. And so, that exact number might depend on your organization. It might be 2,500, might be 10,000, it might be higher. But the point is, ask whether a fundraising activity is worth the time, the mental energy, and the opportunity cost. Because I'm sure you have people probably every day coming to you, hey, it'd be great if your organization did this. It might be an event. Well, okay, ask for a budget, ask for expenses, all those things, and do the math. If something is worthwhile, decide what comes off the plate to make room for it. But just saying no does not mean you're being unkind. You can thank people for their idea. You can explain why you cannot take something on. You can point them in a different direction. Maybe there's another partner out there. But just keep in mind that protecting time, your time, is also part of protecting the mission of your organization. So that is what I prepared for you guys. And I'll stop sharing my screen. I know that was like a ton of information. I'm happy to go through questions, or if any of you have ideas of your own, I would love to hear. Thanks for adding some of the comments around maybe why you're not using AI. I think those are all very, very normal responses. So you're not alone. What are you guys seeing? What are you guys doing? What's worked really well for you in the past?
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm with Main Street Greensburg. I just wanted to add to your last slide about the monetary no threshold. Main Street Greensburg used to host the Market to Meal event every year in August. And so we would hire a chef. We would usually ask a local high school team. This past year, we used the high school's culinary class, and they helped like bus tables. They brought the plates out and all that kind of thing. But the chef uses ingredients from the farmer's market, so it's very like farm to table kind of thing. This last year was very much like a well-oiled machine, but it took us several years to get there. And then even though this year ran very smoothly, once we went through all the figures, it was one of those that we decided we're not bringing back for 2026. It might be something we look at in another year or two, but it wasn't the effort and time that we were putting into it for something that was supposed to be like a fundraising event. It just was not worth it. It wasn't worth the stress. It wasn't worth the burnout on Main Street staff and our, at the time, very small promotions committee. And we're still very small. I think there's 3 or 4 of us right now. So I like that you said that because it is important that, and I think it was hard for us because like, oh wow, this year was like the first time it ran so smoothly and like we had no hiccups, like communication was amazing. And like once we started looking at the numbers, it was like, oh dang. So it is a hard pill to swallow, but very much important to have that no if it's just not worth it. So we're excited to we've changed that out with a sip and shop event to
No, Taylor froze, I think. Is it just
Yeah.
me?
No, I
so
got
we're
frozen.
really looking forward to
Oh,
that. It's called Let's Go Girls. It's like disco cowgirl theme. So we encourage everybody to dress up. Businesses host free events. You buy a ticket and that gets you your shopping passport, a couple drink tickets to a couple of the participating bars who usually do some sort of fun drink or two for the night. And then we just encourage you to go shopping. Shopping passports as you want for the evening. It's a 4-hour event, 5 to 9. But it's really fun just to give people the opportunity to come eat downtown, come have a beverage with their girlfriends, go shopping, go into those businesses that maybe they don't have time to visit on a normal week or weekend. And then there's just those other free activities. Like I'm also a downtown business owner. I opened a bookstore last year. And so we do like glitter freckles and rhinestone tattoos. So we help kind of like accessorize the people who come in and are all dressed up in their fun like disco cowgirl outfit. Another local business does hair tinsel. I think somebody else does hair chalk. So there's just a lot of fun stuff going on. So that has been more beneficial, and it's something that's equally beneficial to the downtown businesses. So
I love that so much. That sounds so fun. I want to go. And when you were talking about the event that you had to let go and it had finally like became a well-oiled machine, it reminded me of something else we say a lot, which is just because it started in Main Street doesn't mean it has to die in Main Street. And so if you all have an event or something where you're like, oh, I mean, we can do it because we've done it so many times. It's just at this point, like easy. Maybe that's actually the best time and opportunity to hand it off to a different organization to do because you have like the clear work plan. Here's how you do it. So thanks for mentioning that. And then Leah, I saw what you said about Seymour Main Street. And I think that's important too, is like knowing when something has ran its course and being willing to try something new. It may or may not work, but you don't know unless you try. So it's exciting to see that you're doing something new with the Taste of Town. That sounds great. And yeah, Laura, an event for introverts. That's my kind of fundraising event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a question. I didn't know if anyone had seen where you have a ticketed event where you're charging an admission. If you've seen over the years, I think we had a really good show right after COVID, but it seems to be trending down that people don't want to pay to come to an event. They want free events. So I didn't know if anyone else was seeing that trend. And then if you have, how do you supplement your fundraising with money making ideas throughout the event if you're not charging an admission?
Holding back to see if the group has wisdom they want to share. So I I don't know that I've noticed that trend until you just named it, Missy, but I think you're right. And I suspect, you know, again, like cost of living and things are tight financially for a lot of people right now for different reasons. And so I do think you're right about maybe more of a desire for free things. I also know from an organizational standpoint that's risky for, I mean, multiple reasons, but like you might sell free tickets to get a head count, and you know, people just are more likely to bail at the last minute if they don't put any skin in the game, even if it's like $5. So I don't know what you're charging for your tickets, but you know, maybe trying to lower the cost and see if that has any effect. It might not. And then throughout the event, you know, depending on what the event is, like that might be an opportunity for merchandise sales, or maybe doing some more regular year-round fundraising that can offset those events, because sometimes there are events that are goodwill for the community that may not be money makers for us, and like sometimes that's okay. So if it's one of those things, yeah, I think it's like supplementing unrestricted funding that comes in throughout the year in other ways. But if others have ideas, I'd love to hear those too.
Ted O'Connell here. I'm with the Jacobsville Area Community Corporation here in Evansville. One of the things that I'm seeing with that is you have the ability to add in like a VIP section into some of these events to where you can make it free, but also have a premium opportunity if somebody wants to come in and have a more elegant experience. They could do that. I know that's something that we've done with we do the Christmas parade here in Evansville. And that was something we added into the Christmas parade last year, was a VIP experience because it is free to attend.
Smart. I like that a lot. Any other questions or examples you want to share with the group?
I did have something. I'm really interested in the brick opportunity, or something along the lines of that. I mean, we have a complete street on our North Main Street. I'm wondering if there's any kind of like hurdles run into with the city with it being in the right of way and selling sponsorship on it. Has anybody done any of that brick initiative in the city right of way before?
Yeah, I'm looking at people's faces. I'm curious if anyone has, but that I don't know. With my particular example, I'm not sure, but I want to find out. So if I find out, I'll follow up with you. But it's a good point, and that might be where your relationship with the city becomes really important. And so having the solid, this is not about you in particular, but in general, like having that solid relationship with your city before something like this comes up, to where it might be an easier time to ask for an exception to a rule or whatever it might be. Like, I just think investing in those relationships before you have to make an ask is really important. And maybe something like this is a good example of why. But anyone else have tried anything like that where you had to work with the city? You're gonna pave the way for all of us. You're gonna be the first
I'm
to
gonna give it a
report
shot.
back. Yeah.
Here's just one more idea that kind of aligned with some of the things we were talking about. For the Christmas parade last year, we actually got some local artists to paint nutcrackers and display them on our main street for the month of December. And then we sold sponsorships to those as well. So they each had a little plaque on the front where a business could buy sponsorship on it. And I think we raised $5,000 just on those nutcrackers alone.
I love that. That's so fun. Heather had a good question too, and I'm wondering if anyone can speak to it. They tried something new with the VIP area for a free event, and it's going slow. Any ideas on how to promote the VIP part or how to get that rolling?
I mean, I think part of it comes down to marketing of the VIP and making sure that you're hitting the target market that can afford it. Maybe some of the business owners around the area can help, buy a whole VIP package for their company as well, to where they can buy a table. I would set it up to where it's not only individual opportunities, but business opportunities to buy into the VIP.
Good call. And then I also see Laura mention the idea of using local influencers. Yeah, like, if you can make it seem very cool, and if all the cool kids in town are doing it and they can share that on their socials and with their friends, it might take a year or two to really get the ball rolling, but it's something you can weigh whether or not it's worth the longer term commitment. I know we're a minute over, so Teresa, I'll hand it back to you to close things out, but thank you all for being here and for sharing your thoughts.
Yes, and thank you, Jackie. Really do appreciate it. Love all the ideas, and it got Glenn and I's juices flowing of some ideas to pass along to those who couldn't be here. But I do appreciate it. I appreciate everybody showing up today and for your guys' participation. I do enjoy it. If you guys have questions, Glenn and I are here to support you guys. And when we don't have the answers, that's when I reach out to Jackie and other Main Street America staff. So please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to support you guys. Other than that, keep an eye on your Main Street Monday, as there are a lot of things coming up this summer that we are hosting. A lot of programs are launching, a lot of grant opportunities. I know this one was huge with grant opportunities for Main Streets to participate in. So keep an eye on your Main Street Monday. But other than that, we will talk to you guys later, and you guys all have a fantastic weekend. Bye, guys.
Bye.
It did.